Our next speaker is Pavel Luksha. And there's the note. Okay, come on up, Pavel.
Hello. Thank you, Hank, for inviting me to this event. And I will be speaking about the transformation that I think will be necessary to organize in the next 10 to 15 years. And I think that it is in our capacity to organize it. Partially relates to transhumanistic cause, but I think it goes beyond that. So we spoke today a lot about the causes that may cause human extinction on Earth. And if we look at what are those causes, the first one is technology breaking loose, an unfriendly AI or other scenarios. A long forgotten scenario of Large Hadron Collider that may produce a black hole was quite popular when it was launched. So I think we can think of some other big science objects that may be seen as threat of a potentially unfriendly technology. There is obviously a technology that is also applied by humans and sort of getting unloosened by humans with catastrophic consequences. This was described in Michael and Isimov's talk today. I think beyond technology that is applied by major powers, such as Russia or the US throwing thermal nukes to each other, there is also a risk of small groups that may launch some of these technologies, and it's increasingly accessible technologies so that, for instance, biotech terrorism is a thing that is quite realistic to see in the next 3 to 4 decades. And the third one is also described in this conference as a different aspects of disruption of our balance with nature that may cause catastrophic consequences, such as global warming and these negative scenarios that may lead us into the acceleration of global warming. Another thing is, that may be known to some of you, is the consequences of the large garbage patch in the ocean. There is one in the Pacific Ocean. There is now one emerging in Indian Ocean. The problem with these plastic patches is that they block sun, so they block the production of plankton in oceans, and plankton is considered as the main source of food in the food chain in oceans, and it's also one of the main producers of oxygen. So on both accounts, there is a risk that because the production of plankton is stopped, and the whole biosphere is disrupted with unpredictable consequences. So what it's all about? There is a pattern. There is a pattern about ourselves. If we look just 500 years backwards, and if there were scientists who would analyze existential risks then, they would say that the majority of risks are those that are external. So there can be a plague, there can be an asteroid, a volcano eruption. So these are catastrophic. There was a 16th century, no, it's 14th century, Black Death that eradicated 1/3 of, or was it between 1/3 and 2/3? No, 1/3. 1/3 of European population. But anyway, the pattern dramatically changed. Now we're discussing risks that are mostly internal, that are produced by ourselves. And this is logical. This is the way the civilization develops. If we look at the pattern of how it develops, we started by trying to cope with different problems that pose existential risks, or even require the survival, require our attention for survival in the external environment. So we as humans were very efficiently to adapt to various external pressures by producing technologies. And that started a long time ago with different transformations. There was Neolithic technological revolution, there was a shift to agriculture, there was industrial revolution, and every next major step of development of technology was required partially because they were seen as response to natural pressures, but more and more so because it was seen as a response to intraspecies pressures, to something that, well, what is the main driver of innovation in the last 3 or 4 centuries? It's war. So it's about humans fighting with humans. And the development of technologies was a consequence of finding technologies that could help one population be better off than the other. And every technological development allowed us to step a little bit higher and grow the population. But what is important is not only about the quantities that are growing, it's also the complexity that is growing. So if we look at this very simple scheme, so we started as a civilization, as a humanity, we started with external problems and developed various hard and soft technologies that help us solve those problems. And indeed, there is a negative feedback loop that allowed us to kind of master the external problems. So we are kind of masters of the nature. And there are less and less risks that are external. But they cause increasing number of internal problems. And the problem, this is the positive feedback loop. So the more we go that direction, the more problems we actually create for ourselves. Trying to think about this as an organization of different technologies. How do they relate to each other? What types of technologies should we look to actually try to find a solution to this positive feedback loop? How we can break out of it, so to say. Yeah, a very simple scheme that I use is to try to think of different hard and soft technologies in our culture as a sort of sandwich. So we start with technologies that are very simple, that allow us to extract from nature, for instance, hunting. And then there are technologies that allow us to process, and technologies that allow us to break from one place to another, for instance, transportation, and then communication. And then there come soft technologies, starting with things such as economics, which is a type of technology, markets that allow us to grow bigger societies, and institutes and social norms and rules that allow us to actually develop different kinds of complex societies. And at the very top of it are actually technologies that work with our mind, with our consciousness, with our way of perceiving things, with our worldviews, and so forth. So these lower technologies are those that are more hard technologies, more responsible for resource provision, whereas the higher top of the sandwich are those technologies that are more seen as soft technologies, working with coordination and control. So the way to organize the sandwich is actually to think what technologies control other technologies, or what technologies enable and support the other technologies. And this is the way why this hierarchy was built. So at the very top of it are technologies that are working with basically ourselves and our perceptions of the world. Now if we look at the rate of transformation in this sandwich, the normal way of developing civilization was that every part of this sandwich had to develop at approximately the same rate as others. So there is the concept that is called the socio-technical balance. So there has to be a balance between all these layers. Now what's happening now? These material technologies were developing very fast in in the last several centuries. The technologies that allow us to actually coordinate these technologies are at the medium rate of development, whereas technologies that are at the top are the slowest to develop. Now the question is, where are we going with this? Isn't there a risk that this part is actually getting out of control because it develops too fast in response to the part that is supposed to control it? So this implies, for me, in this analysis, that our civilization has been very efficient at coping with world problems through technology, and especially the Western civilization has launched this, so to say, innovation cycles that is able now to produce technologies at an ever-accelerating rate with an industrialized sphere of knowledge accumulation and development and invention. But the problem is we are very bad at keeping the pace with our own creations, and we're sort of in this sorcerer-apprentice fable where we are now discussing the AI, for instance, breaking loose, as the major existential risk. But AI is a creation, it will be a creation of our own research lab. So it's something that we intend to create to support our civilization. And we believe it may pose the major existential risk to ourselves. So I believe the problem is not with AI per se, it's the problem with us who think we might design AI which will be so unfriendly to us that it will kill us. So the problem is with our individual and collective minds that may conceive such things, may make them possible, and may have these suicidal intents that we want to actually, some of us may want to create, to destroy the whole humanity, theoretically. So for me, all this discussion about the transhumanism transformation should be focused not so much on technology enablers. It should be focused on the issue of how we can establish the self-guided evolution of consciousness. So we should focus on something that controls the technology. And essentially this boils down to three long-term scenarios, not so long-term, it's long-term in more like business terms or like social terms. Anything beyond 5 years is staying a long-term. Yeah, I think 20 years. Everybody, I think, in this room still expects to be alive by that time. I hope. Three possible, very basic scenarios. So one of them is continuation of the existing model, which is essentially non-sustainable. It's not only non-sustainable because we're taking out the fossil fuels or we're producing too much plastic. It's much deeper than that. So it's only few of the manifestation of this non-sustainability. We are not in the balance of developing the technologies that support our existence. We are now unable to actually control this development. So this is kind of cyberpunk scenario where, well, you can find it a lot in many movies that basically explore how the future society may look like. And in many of those, but not only cyberpunk, think of Star Wars. What is the keyword? War. Anywhere we talk about future, there are very little positives there. It's all about wars, it's all about conflicts, it's all about destruction, rogue AI, and so on. It's in our probably mental set. We expect something negative is going to happen. That's what interests us somehow. Now, there is a more dramatic scenario that we are unable to control the technology and that it basically creates the collapse of civilization. That was discussed vastly today. Third one, well, different names can be given to that. I call it green cognitivity, well, strange words. But what it means is that we somehow find the way to establish the new type of sustainable societies, to find this truly sustainable model that goes beyond the limitation of existing way of living. Where to look for it? Now, what are the key challenges to this solved? Think. Well, if you name them, so one of them is that we have urges in our collective and individual minds to for physical destruction, humans by humans. And the good news is that actual number of conflicts in our civilization, destructive conflicts, has been constantly reducing over the existence of humanity. It's in the Steven Pinker's book that was published a few years ago, that somehow we managed to find ways to avoid this destructive urge to be applied on the scale that is technically possible for us. And there is another book, there is another guy in Russia whose name is Akopa Nazaritan. He studied about this problem about the same time as Pinker. He published only in Russian, unfortunately, but he found the same dependence, and he has also an explanation. He says that over time, human culture was able to adopt these destructive urges and convert them into something else, like, for instance, sports, or in recent years, video games. Video games is, by the way, a very useful thing to explore the negative, the destructive energy of the youth, which always has been the main driver of destruction in any society since the prehistorical times. Now, the second thing is urges to get more and more from the environment that essentially lead to non-restorable destruction of nature. And the third one is that we're, as species, have so many mental traps, so to say, that we are susceptible to fall in so-called vicious circles of self-organized crisis. Because we have improper worldviews, well, think of situations such as early Nazi Germany, where everybody believed this will bring prosperity to the German population. It's all ended up in death of tens of millions of people. And the other problem is there is lack of trust and understanding. And I like this presentation that was before me about the lack of emotional contact. That's one of the dimensions of it. But if you think of these three problems, how would you name them? It's anger, it's greed, it's ignorance. It's something that actually religions talked about for thousands of years, trying to cope with that. Understanding these as major issues to the existence of humanity, even then when it was not existential risk. They were not too successful. I would say they were successful to bring us here, but who knows whether that would be enough. I don't think that would be enough. Because we are at this conference discussing existential risk, and we see the main existential risks are risks that we ourselves create. So the question is how we can avoid that. And I think the question actually boils down to the issue of governance, the new way of governing ourselves on the various scales, from very basic scale of human-to-human interaction of families or communities, and up to the humanity as a whole. So, if we frame it in the way that was framed before, then the design would require something that strengthens our qualities of love, openness, acceptance on large scale, allowing large communities to live in peace and prosper together without destroying each other. And hence our responsibility for nature on increasing scale, while also creating opportunities for self-development, self-realization, and retain some productive competition, because competition is the vehicle of evolution. So it allows to select for beneficial qualities. And security is also necessary. So how to make it more practical. What do we need to do? And relate this to transhumanistic cause. The structures of social governance should be structures that set objectives, help set objectives and means for collective action, coordinate and update in real time in large communities. And that will require very intensified use of technologies, including artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things and many more. So that will require us to embrace the collective dimension. For instance, sharing of knowledge and experiences and emotions in real time, allowing instant access by every member of the community, and ideally directly kind of downloading without mediation of words or mediation of visual contact, like brain-to-brain contact. Spreading of desirable states of mind, like think of a Buddha enlightening everyone immediately. Digital enlightenment, some call it. I think sharing of bodies and mind, that's something that is brings us beyond the isolation of individuality that causes so many of these problems that we discussed. Well, individuality has reasons, has its own reasons, and I think that these fears have to be resolved. So, retention of individual knowledge and experiences, and issues about longevity that allow to retain or repair our bodies, and something else, something that preserves our, so to say, higher consciousness in ourselves. Some call it digital immortality. We can think also about digital reincarnation or digital nirvana. I don't know which is better, to keep our states of mind as they are or help them advance. But essentially, I think this leads us to the issue that we require an emergence of circumstances that will bring us to creation of circumstances that will bring to emergence of collective minds and bodies, and that are sustainable, not only flesh mobs that are created and then dissolved, like collective minds and bodies that are able to learn. So there is to shift the level of human evolution from individual into the community level. And I think this is, we're at the point where this is already feasible. So this is about the work that me and my colleagues are doing. We're taking current trends that are already there. Some of them are negative trends. So the negative in terms of that they may have serious negative impact on humanity as a whole. Some of them are, so to say, positive on the same grounds. Then we bring forth the desirable design as a series of implementable projects. This allows to discuss what are the hardware technologies, the soft technologies, and the cultural enablers that actually bring forth this possible future. And we call this project Neuroweb. So it's about the creation of the next communication space. We think that a lot of this is at the very early stage is already in the internet that we see in information technologies that are now developing. But there are so many things that are required to be developed to actually bring us there. So, yeah. So there are trends that actually support this. I think we're in the process of creating something that will be an enabler of this positive future. So one of them is that technologies tend to become more and more natural, so meaning that at least their interfaces become more user-friendly. But eventually that will mean also that technologies will require less and less effort to be produced by specially designed efforts. So then it becomes self-replicatable, or maybe become part of the environment. Things may grow, like trees grow. We can grow our chairs or tables or whatnot. So this naturalization is happening and will happen further. Next thing is amplification of our minds and bodies. Well, that's also happening. If you look at prosthetics or some of the early designs of artificial senses, or some of the simple things that we can call mind augmentation. Even that most of you probably don't remember telephones and numbers anymore. We all use our telephones to remember them. That's a very simple way of mind augmentation, and there are many more. Technosphere becomes smaller, and gets sort of alive. And in design that are now discussed, for instance, for the Internet of Things, they talk about these smart ambience where every object is talking to each other. They all adapt to you and me for use. And there is discussion that things that Google, for instance, does with kind of tracking each of our searching intentions on the internet, allow them to create artificial agents that will eventually help us do routine things on the internet, like choosing the optimal tourist track for our vacation. We don't have to think about it, we just use our own agent that actually is a mirror of ourselves that remembers all our previous choices. And it designs for us the new tool. Then the network culture, something that allows us to be collectively, horizontally communicating, that is complexity-oriented work, for instance, the very diverse groups are able to cope with complex issues. Something very based on emergence. You were talking today about that Idiocracy is one example of that. And I think there will be a lot of work happening in this direction. So in the next 15 years, that may bring us this new communicative space that will allow to actually enable the emergence of groups that will be able to solve these type of problems, because this will be the point of evolution of humanity. Yeah, in the roadmap we're talking about four different aspects. We're talking about hardware, the maps that will be required. So brain emulation work that Randall Kuhn is doing is part of that. We also think that another work that will be required is mapping of our consciousness, because it's not exactly mapped one-on-one on our neural functions, so it's not the same. Then there is a lot about psychotechniques and soft techniques that allow us, for instance, to learn very fast, allow us to be productive collectively and individually, and everything that does with collective intelligence. And of course, this environment will require completely new ethics. When we're at the very early stage of developing internet ethics, and there will be an explosion of new opportunities that will require a complete reversion of ethics. So what the group that we started working on right now, we're at the stage where I don't present the roadmap itself, it's too detailed. So there is a website, and I encourage you to go and look at it. But what we think is necessary to do is to advance this and to help create educational programs and research that will be actually implementations of this roadmap. But I think there are a lot of things that this community can do, and we're happy to join forces, and it may not only be related to Neuroweb, but also to related transhumanist discussions. So one of them is, I mentioned open science. So in my opinion, open science is anything that goes beyond doing science, potentially doing science in universities and established research institutions. And a lot of groups that are doing this as like biohackers, or people that just want to do their own research on the educational project that they do. So they kind of collect data and see whether it can be published as a paper, turned into a startup, and so on. Community learning. Community learning is actually about building this capacity for collective intelligence. Learning how to be together in larger groups, in more flexible groups, and that's very important. And I think that there are some very interesting projects with open education that embrace the sustainability-oriented education. One of them is people that are associated with the International Society of System Science are doing. It's called World, I think, Evolutionary Learning Trial. It's a network of sites that use certain sustainability principles along the lines that we discussed, and it's a network of those learning sites across the world. Then collective intelligence techniques. The more we know how to enhance our collective abilities to think, to problem solve, but more so to create and build the future together. The more we know about it, the better. So I think it's the age of education technologies, it's the age of managerial technologies, and we should all be looking into it, learn that. We can prototype. Prototyping, I think the best way to prototype is using science art, because science art is now seen as something that is not very useful, so to say. So it's even by definition of people who are curators of science art exhibitions. They say, oh, it's useful, there is no science art. That's a true conversation that I had. But I think the more and more we see it, the more and more there is art that is actually useful. And I was speaking with one curator in New York just 2 days ago, and she was telling about some art that uses biofeedback to actually restore our proper state, psychophysical state, so it gets like the binaural sounds that in the ambience that help us recover. So these things are very useful to actually work with. That's one thing that we can do. I think exploration of mind spaces is something that we should all be also engaged in. One thing is a movement that some of you may know, it's Wisdom 2.0. There's a growing conference that talks about the awareness building techniques and application of technologies to those techniques. And I think there is also something that, there was a guy at the conference in March from, who's the head of Stanford Transhumanist Association, Andres. Yeah, he spoke about mapping consciousness in different states of consciousness. So I think that it can be actually done as an open source project. Why not? Something that is going to use the energy of some very enthusiastic people that use different types of substances, like the ones described in recently deceased Shulgin's book, and do an open source mapping platform that actually helps us advance at least some of these work on mapping our consciousness. Yeah. And I think this is a totally achievable thing that we should work on together. Thank you. There's a website on the last page.
Hold on. I got it. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Just answer questions.
Yeah.
I got it.
We got time for 2 questions. No questions? There's a question. Peter.
So, do you think that earlier speakers said we have this turbulence that we have to work through and of existential risk? And once we work through this turbulence, it'll be all plain sailing. And it was stated as a fact. I was wondering about that. Why would we believe that? And so what is your view on it? Aren't the challenges, even if we deal with the challenges of the next 50, 100 years, potentially wouldn't you more difficult challenges for us?
By the way, it's an interesting metaphor, but I was thinking when Seth presented it that James Martin himself actually died in the turbulence. So he died a few years ago when he went into a storm on his boat. So it's a continuation of the metaphor. The response is that I think by actually kind of shifting the level of evolution we are now at the sort of a bottleneck where we are approaching this possible transition. If we do live, so to say, if we do transform, then it creates an opportunity space for us as a new type of species that would evolve by then as a collective mind. So for me, we're at the stage that is approximately similar to, in evolutionary times, to the emergence of multicellular organisms, approximately. And then the evolution continued on different, so to say, there were obviously risks for those early multicellular organisms, but there were also a large opportunity space created. But then that may also lead to the divergence of the human population as one. So that may lead to emergence of several post-singularity species, so to say, that will maybe compete with each other, maybe occupy different niches, who knows. But I think this kind of opens up a space. Of course, there will be new evolutionary challenges, and some of them may not even be expressed in the concepts, in mind concepts that we use currently. Because I think this is the challenge that can only be thought of or be perceived by those collective minds. And we are at the very early stage of forming these collective minds. So we kind of, for instance, collectively feel fear about certain things. But, yeah.
One last question, go ahead.
I think there was the words of Nanotech Nexus. Well, surprising because it's everything you were describing about the Neuroweb, this support functions and all that, right?
On Nexus, right. Yeah.
Okay, so you know, we
Yeah.
talk about that, right? Is it something similar to what he's talking about? And if so, do you think it is actually possible, the scenario where we create this sort of operating system that runs on these brains?
I'm thinking of this a little bit different terms. I think we use too much of the computer terms. In a situation that is much more complex than that. So I think that our bodies actually are much more complex tools than anything that we've been able to create ourselves so far. So I would expect that yes and no, that the way to organize these collective minds requires to create the totality of communication that would allow us to go beyond the verbal communication only. Like, for instance, why we gather in physical space? Because there is much more information we exchange than only verbal information. That requires us to be together, requires us to perceive together, and requires us to learn together. And so we have to create environments, communicative environments and technologies that enable us to go beyond the physical limitations in this context.
But I think that's exactly what Nexus is about, is that this interdependence, it's not a really deep imagination to imagine that you can use human neural pathways as a tool.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying I'm saying completely new things. I'm not implying that. What I'm implying is I think we have to look at this as completely feasible thing. That's one. Two, we have to advance it. And three, we have to advance it by establishing collective action. And that's what me and my colleagues are trying to do. And if any of you are interested in joining forces, or it doesn't mean that you have to subscribe to this view, but if you think this is useful for you, then we can team up.
What were your workshop dates? Where?
They were in Russia. Now we're going to conduct several in the US, but that probably is going to happen next year.
Okay, thank you.